Rolling. This is the FedSoc Films Podcast,
where we continue the conversation sparked on film.
Quiet on set.
You want to know what freedom tastes like? It tastes like this beer.
Take one.
This is, in fact, the classic solution in search of a problem.
Action.
That cannot help but be controversial.
Cut.
With expert discussion and analysis.
With the greatest legal minds on the topic today, the FedSoc Films Podcast. It's a wrap.
Welcome to the FedSoc Films Podcast. I'm Matt Wood, director of FedSoc Films. In the early 1980s, General Motors found the perfect place to build a new factory in Detroit. That meant much-needed jobs, economic development, and prosperity. The only problem was an entire neighborhood stood in the way. Our film Taking Poletown explores the battle between the neighborhood known as Poletown and the city of Detroit, along with General Motors, over the power and purpose of using eminent domain to transfer private property for public use. Looking back 30 years later, after 2 Michigan Supreme Court cases and a Michigan constitutional amendment, what lessons can we learn? In this episode of the FedSoc Films Podcast, we're going to revisit some of the issues discussed in the film while diving deeper into the court case that came after the Poletown case, called County of Wayne v. Hathcock. And to do this, we've invited Professor John Mogk, a distinguished law professor from Wayne State University in Michigan, an expert on the topic of eminent domain, especially in Michigan, and of course, Professor Mogk was also featured in our film, Taking Poletown. Professor Mogk, welcome to the FedSoc Films Podcast, and thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks, Matt. I'm happy to contribute to your program.
Wonderful. Well, we're happy to have you. Just to kind of kick us off, I'd love to hear about why you became a law professor and what area of law you like to teach most.
Well, my focus is on urban law and policy. I enjoy teaching most land use planning, state and local government law, critical urban issues. And I've done that for the past 52 years at Wayne State University Law School. But let me give you a little background. I was born and raised in Detroit in the Jefferson Chalmers community, which is in the southeast corner of the city. And after practicing for 4 years in New York, I moved back to assume this faculty position and moved back into my old neighborhood, which was designated by the city as a redevelopment neighborhood. Some of the blocks were distressed, but a good deal of the neighborhood was in good condition. And there was a Citizens District Council elected by the residents of the neighborhood to work with the city in planning its redevelopment. I was the elected chairman of the Citizens District Council, 24 residents throughout the neighborhood. And we worked with the city in planning the redevelopment of the neighborhood, which included the building of 2 boulevards, the building of 3 schools, the building of a new subdivision, and the building of a shopping center. Roughly 300 of the 760 acres were necessary to be acquired to accomplish all of that. And eminent domain was used to do that over the next 10 years. And unlike the Poletown case, where a couple of hundred residents objected out of several thousand, there was really no objection in the Jefferson Chalmers neighborhood to using eminent domain because the Federal Relocation Act of 1970 had been passed when the project began. It applied also to Poletown, and residents received the fair market value for their property along with, at the time, $15,000 of additional grant funds to buy a standard home in the neighborhood or a standard home in any other neighborhood of their choice. And the residents found that they had benefited greatly by being part of the redevelopment process. So that has really tempered a condition my attitude about using eminent domain in Detroit and other distressed neighborhoods throughout the country.
So let me touch on a few things. So can you remind us what year that was? And then
the project began in 1970, and in fact, it still continues. But the major effort in moving the redevelopment forward occurred from 1970 to 1980. And the Jefferson Chalmers redevelopment project is the largest neighborhood project in the city of Detroit, and had more land acquired by eminent domain than any other neighborhood in the city, with the exception of Poletown, where there were 400 acres acquired, and the exception of the building of the Chrysler assembly plant on Jefferson Avenue, immediately adjacent to the neighborhood.
So this started about 10 years before Poletown, and then went all the way up to about when the Poletown project happened, and this was the neighborhood that you were living in.
I was born and raised in the neighborhood. After law school, I went to practice law in New York, and then I returned to the neighborhood when I joined the Wayne State Law faculty.
And so this shaped your view on eminent domain, and
it sure did. It sure does. And let me say, I'm not speaking about eminent domain in Detroit or elsewhere as a casual observer. I was actually involved in representing the residents of the neighborhood in connection with a redevelopment project that was the second largest in the city.
Represented as in you were their attorney?
No, I was their elected chairman of their citizens council. I was a resident of the neighborhood.
And so for our audience who may not know what eminent domain is, give us an overview of what eminent domain is and what it does.
Eminent domain is a sovereign is an inherent power of a sovereign. So, for example, the United States government has the power of eminent domain to carry out the purposes of the federal government, and states have the power of eminent domain to carry out the purposes of state government, and it allows the government, or a sovereign, be it in the United States or around the world, it allows the sovereign to take private property for a public purpose. And so what the sovereign has to do is and in the United States and the various states, the taking has to be accompanied by paying just compensation to the private landowner, but it must serve a public purpose. And in the case of the United States Constitution, and in the case of the Michigan Constitution, in order for either the United States government or the state of Michigan to take property, they must establish that they're taking it for a public use. And the question that's been on the table for since the first action using eminent domain is, what does the term public use mean? Does it mean simply a public purpose, or does it mean something that's more limited than a public purpose when the term public use is utilized? In the case of the federal government, in Kelo versus the town of New London, the U.S. Supreme Court determined that the use of the word use, public use, in the U.S. Constitution, the Fifth Amendment, was essentially tantamount to the term public purpose. But in the case in Michigan, the Poletown case, the Poletown court, with the majority of the Poletown court, felt that the use of the term public use also meant a public purpose. But in the case that followed, the Hathcock case that overturned Poletown, the Supreme Court of Michigan determined, as it related to the Michigan Constitution, that the term public use is a more limited in scope and is not tantamount to public purpose, and does not allow for private property to be taken by the government, be it the state or a local government, to be transferred to another private person for economic development purposes. That's the essence of the Hathcock case.
Great. And so we're going to get into all of that. I think that's a great summary and preview of what we'll talk about in this episode. So to dive deeper into the case of Poletown, for our audience who may not have seen our film Taking Poletown, or who don't know the story of Poletown, would you mind giving a brief overview of the Poletown community, the Poletown factory project, and the Poletown case?
Well, you have to start with the conditions in the city of Detroit at the time that the Poletown project was proposed. Detroit grew to be almost 2 million in size, 2 million residents in size by 1955. And then the population began to decline as the industry in the city began to move out. And the reason why the industry was moving out is that economic base, the manufacturing base, which is the principal economic underpinning of this city's economy, that manufacturing base was constructed prior to World War I. And so by the time we get to essentially 1950 and then beyond, these older plants, which were constructed on small sites, multiple stories in height, were not amenable to the new manufacturing production approach. And so as the manufacturing companies, the Chrysler, General Motors, and Ford, were facing competition from abroad and had to become more efficient and build new plants. They could not renovate the existing old plants that were built prior to World War I and needed to build single-story plants on larger sites. And there simply wasn't any land available beginning in the mid-1950s to do that because the city was fully built up. And once these smaller plants were constructed prior to World War I, neighborhoods were built around the plant site. So in order to expand a plant and make it more efficient for production, you'd have to extend the boundaries of the plant into a neighborhood, and that's what caused the Poletown problem. But anyhow, in terms of Detroit, Detroit was almost 2 million in size in 1955, and thereafter, on average, it began to decline in population by 1,500 residents a month for the next 65 years. So that today,
Wow.
the size of the city is 650,000. So you go from 2 million in 1955 to 650,000 today. 2/3 of the population of the city has moved out. Now that's a city that was fully built out in 1955, and so as you move jobs out of the city and as you move population out of the city becomes pockmarked in many areas of the city with low density neighborhoods and with tens of thousands of vacant lots in a checkerboard fashion throughout 2/3 of the city. And in order for the city to be redeveloped, this land has to be assembled and repurposed because the economy is gone with respect to which the city was originally built. And so there has to be some new approach to economic development and expansion that cannot be accommodated by the existing land use patterns of Detroit. Now, moving back to Poletown. So we get to Poletown, the Poletown project. The manufacturing plants beginning in 1955 are beginning to move out of the city. And in 1973, Coleman Young, Detroit's first African-American mayor, was elected to office. And about that time, there was an organization formed known as Detroit Renaissance. And the mayor was a member of the board of Detroit Renaissance, as were all the other automotive executives and major other industrial heads in the city. And the mayor made a request of the auto companies that thereafter, after he had joined Detroit Renaissance Board, if they were planning to move their plants out of the city and taking, of course, jobs with them, with the movement of the plant, that the mayor would be given an opportunity to work with whomever it was to identify a site within the city where the plant could be relocated. And so that gave rise to the Poletown project. General Motors had 2 plants that were built in southwest Detroit prior to or around World War I. The Cadillac plant and the Fisher Body plant that employed 6,000 employees, most of them being Detroit residents. And they became inefficient. And so the General Motors was planning to build a single plant that would combine the production of both of those plants, and offered to keep their production in the city if the mayor could work with them in identifying a site that would accommodate the plant. Now, these plants were built multi-story in height. To give you an example, the old Packard plant, which had 5 million square feet of floor space, was built on 40 acres. Now, the new General Motors plant, which essentially would have the same level of production, built on a single story, needed 400 acres in order to build a single story plant versus a 5-story plant, and then accommodate all the other management of inventory and accommodate the arrival and the departure of the workers from the site. Now, the mayor worked with General Motors in identifying 9 possible sites, all of which would have required, these were vacant industrial sites, all of which would have required expanding the site 2 or 3 or 4 times, fourfold into adjacent neighborhoods, most of which were some degree distressed. But the site that seemed to be the best was the site of the Hamtramck Dodge main assembly plant that had been vacated the year before, that was on the Hamtramck Detroit border. This Dodge plant was on 65 acres, and the plant had been closed. It was on a railhead. It was on a power line grid, and so it was the most ideal site for a new manufacturing plant. But the plant design, single-story design, required 450 plus acres to be cleared. Now, the neighborhood itself was built around the turn of the 20th century, and so a substantial portion of the neighborhood was still in solid condition, and there was not a small portion of the neighborhood that was in decline. And the population had already begun to leave the neighborhood. So the question that was presented was, General Motors had in mind several other sites where this plant could have been constructed. One was in the Detroit suburbs, and one was out of state, where there was already available a green site with nothing on it, a farmland of 400 and some acres. But time was of the essence as General Motors saw it. They wanted a cleared site within 18 months. Well, you can't negotiate 4,000 separate parcels of land or whatever the number was, close to that, and clear the site in 18 months. And so the mayor formed the Detroit Economic Development Corporation, which under state law had the power of eminent domain as a political subdivision of the state and of the city, and made good faith offers to the landowners, and essentially used the power of eminent domain to assemble the site within 18 months. Now, anytime that the city has used eminent domain since the Federal Relocation Act was passed, and even before, back in the old urban renewal days, the city doesn't use its own money to carry out eminent domain. It uses federal grant funds under the Community Development Block Grant Program. And the Federal Relocation Act is triggered by the use of federal money, so that if you use federal money, you must provide the economic benefits under the Act to those residents whose homes are being taken. So in Poletown, as was true in Jefferson Chalmers, the residents received the fair market value for their property plus an additional $15,000 to buy a home in an adjoining neighborhood or any neighborhood of their choice. Now, when the Institute for Social Research of the University of Michigan did a survey of the residents who were relocated, whose homes were purchased, nearly 90% of the residents were happy with their outcome of the project. And on the other hand, there was a very vocal, and understandably so. I'm not being critical of those who were opposed to the project, but their numbers paled in connection with the number of residents who were being adversely affected. And their parish was being taken, although the Catholic Archdiocese of Detroit supported the project. The local parish parishioners and their priest, whose parish was being taken, were opposed. So they basically brought a lawsuit against the city, using the power of eminent domain under the state constitution in the Poletown case. And the Michigan Supreme Court at that time decided that there was no basis for them to block the use of eminent domain to carry out the project. They were aided by Ralph Nader, who came to town and who had been a concerted critic of General Motors, to aid in the opposition. But anyhow, the project went forward. The area was cleared within 18 months. The residents were relocated. I mentioned to you the Institute of Social Research found that almost 90% felt that they benefited from the project. The plant was built on time. The plant is a 2 million square feet, $2 billion plant. It's been operating ever since, although the Wall Street Journal, 10 years after the project, ran an editorial saying that the plant had never been built. And then a Harvard law professor picked up on that in a talk show that I just absolutely could not believe what I was hearing. But the plant has operated continuously. It's produced 4 million cars. It also has produced a considerable amount of tax revenue for the city, and it's now being converted to a plant that will produce electric vehicles for General Motors.
Well, thank you for the summary. I think that's an excellent history of a complicated topic, and I think it paints a picture quite well. So there was blight, there was economic issues, and eminent domain was a tool for the city to use to try to revitalize things. And you mentioned that 90% of the residents surveyed were satisfied, but somewhere around 10% weren't. And so, nevertheless, there was quite a fight. And our film featured a lot of what that struggle was. I'd like to play a short clip from our film, Taking Poletown, of something, a line that you talk about the importance of eminent domain, and I'd like to have you comment on that. So we're going to play the short clip. It's about 30 seconds long, and then we'll get back to the question.
Eminent domain will help the city and others similarly distressed in the country by allowing it to assemble land, to repurpose land, to increase density, provide for new housing projects, to provide for new commercial and industrial projects. If land is just scattered about, even though there's a large amount of it, it can't be effectively used.
So this is similar to what you were talking about, and this is one of the lines that we have in the film. And so clearly there was a fight between the homeowners who didn't want to move and GM and the city. But in this clip, you talk about the importance of eminent domain from, I think, being efficient. That if you have land that's scattered about, you can't efficiently use it. So could you talk about how policymakers, or how you look at this when you're determining why eminent domain is an important tool in situations like this?
Well, cities are built and rebuilt one block at a time, one neighborhood at a time, and cities decline one block at a time, one neighborhood at a time. And so you'd have to drive through Detroit to get in a sense of how this operates in the extreme. There are neighborhoods, many neighborhoods in Detroit that are essentially have only 10% of the residents that continue to live there. There are a number that have only 20% of the residents that continue to live there. And
Wow.
they live in scattered homes throughout the neighborhood. And many of them are low-income residents who really can't afford to maintain older homes that have a lot of expenses associated with repair and replacing their systems. And so they would be benefited if somebody would come along and offer to buy, my view, and based upon my experience, if somebody would come along and offer to buy their home and pay for their relocation and also give them a grant so they can buy another decent home in a neighborhood that's not obliterated. Now, that is not going to happen unless that neighborhood is targeted for redevelopment. And unless and if that neighborhood that neighborhood will not be targeted for redevelopment if land cannot be assembled, because no private investor. Now, the other part of this is that neighborhoods are built block by block and neighborhood by neighborhood, but not by the government, but by private investors, by private individuals. And it's the private individual that drives the economy. And so private investors are not going to be interested in building new housing development or building some commercial development or industrial development if land cannot be assembled, if they have to purchase property lot by lot. And so if there's the project's not undertaken, then these lower income residents who live in these, let's take 1 square mile. You got 1 square mile and you've got 1,000 people living in 1 square mile, whereas normally you would have 20,000 people. They're going to be there. They're not going. Nobody is going to help them. And the city, as its tax base declines, cannot deliver city services at the same level that it did when the city was fully occupied and prosperous. So they're faced with declining city services, and they're faced with being in a neighborhood that is obliterated, and there's nobody coming along to help them. And so just from the point of view of the residents in distressed neighborhoods, from an economic point of view, they're better off if a project can be undertaken. But a project can't be undertaken unless private investors who are putting up their own money along with some local government subsidies are convinced that they can acquire land and complete a project. And so that's the problem the city faces right now, Detroit.
So, what's the balancing act? How do policymakers, or how should they, or just people, be thinking about one person's right to their property versus a community or a city's role to provide services and to better the community? How do you find that balance act?
Well, that's a really good question. Of course, that is the critical question. And I think that California has struck the balancing act. At the same time that after the Hathcock case, for the most part, those who supported the Hathcock approach to eminent domain, preventing eminent domain from being used for economic development purposes, I believe they provided the energy behind thereafter amending the state constitution to essentially write into the Constitution the principles that were ingrained in the Hathcock opinion. So the eminent domain provision of the Michigan Constitution got amended, and now it expressly provides that eminent domain may not be used for the purpose of taking private property from one person to be transferred to another private person. But in California, and that was roughly in 2006 when that amendment was passed. At the same time, of course, this issue, is one that's important around the country, the particular issue that you raised, and it was being wrestled with in California as well. And California put two propositions on the ballot, known as Proposition 98 and Proposition 99. And I think I'm correct in saying this. The approach was that the proposition that it would affect eminent domain in California. And the approach was the proposition that got the most votes would be the one that would amend this California state constitution. I think I'm correct in saying Proposition 98 prevailed. And what Proposition 98 in California provides, that if a resident owns a home, as an owner occupies a home, and has lived there for 1 year or more, their property may not be taken by the use of eminent domain. But all other property owners are subject to having their property taken by eminent domain for economic development purposes. Now, that is workable, because if and I understand if somebody's lived there for a year or more, it may be their family home, it may be they feel very strongly about their local church, their local institution, their neighbors close by, they don't want to move. And so, in respecting their interests and their rights, if they've lived there a year or more and they own the home, if they're a homeowner, their property may not be taken for economic development purposes. But in terms of redeveloping a neighborhood, that should not present a problem, because most of the problem is presented by speculators, investors who come along and pick up at tax foreclosure vacant property, and then they try to hold up a project. Or if somebody is a homeowner, they're going to have, they will reach, the government will reach a price where it will make sense for the homeowner to sell. But most of the problems that are holding up projects are not homeowners. They're speculators. You have to excuse me, but it's the scumbags of the world. They run around trying to not treat residents fairly and not treat the government fairly and simply line their pockets. It's a process I call Lando, like Lotto. Lando is speculators buying property simply to be disruptive and to line their pockets. But to answer your question, I think Proposition 98 in California does a good job balancing the interest of the private homeowner and the government to further the public interest.
Oh, I think that's a solid answer. I appreciate something so specific. That's fascinating. So I want to get to Hathcock, because I think that's very important. But I would like to ask just one follow-up before we get on to Hathcock, which is, if you took the proposition from California and applied that logic to Poletown, would that change the outcome or change your view on what happened in Poletown?
Well, no, I go along with that. Apply it to Poletown, and if that killed the project, it kills the project. I think the project was it was a difficult one for the city. I think it was a good one for the city. But there has to be a balance, I believe, in terms of what makes good sense from a policy perspective and what I think the general public expects there to be, the political, the view of the public at large.
So,
but I don't think that would have happened. I think that there would the homeowner. We're talking about a handful of people, folks. I mean, if there were a couple of hundred people opposed to this, that would be it. And a good deal of them may not have been homeowners. So, but if you had to negotiate a purchase of 100 homes, there could be, my view, there would be a price in which you could get all 100 homes within the period allotted for the land to be acquired. If you have to negotiate 4,000 homes, we're talking about something else.
Well, I hope that one thing that the film does do is show that it was a tough decision, regardless of how someone may view the topic. But to get to Hathcock, I think that your idea of balance gets us to Hathcock. So Poletown is in 1981. That case upholds the taking, so that Detroit and General Motors can expand the plant. But then in 2004, 3 years later, there's a new case, and it's also at the Michigan Supreme Court, and that's City of Wayne v. Hathcock. And so you wrote a law article about that, and I'd love to dive into that. So why don't you tell me about what this case Hathcock does and how it relates to Poletown?
Well, let me just, as it relates to Poletown. Poletown was a situation where when the project was proposed, as previously I described, the city's unemployment rate was particularly high, and it was very high for the African American community. It's estimated there was an estimate that the African American community, black residents were struggling with 18% unemployment. That probably was a low estimate. We're probably talking about Depression era unemployment within the African American community. 25% would probably be more accurate. And that's why the mayor was so anxious to see that, try to prevent the jobs from moving out of town. And all of that that's actually detailed in the Poletown case in a footnote by Justice Ryan. Justice Ryan actually was opposed to the Poletown decision, but he acknowledged that the situation in Detroit at the time was approaching Depression level economic conditions. Now let's talk about Hathcock. The case is County of Wayne versus Hathcock. In this case, the county was bringing an action to assemble land next to Metropolitan Airport in the suburbs. This is 15 miles outside of the center of Detroit. And it's around the Detroit Metropolitan Airport, which is one of the most prosperous and active and successful economic generators in the country in terms of airports. And the County of Wayne had acquired with some federal funds land around the airport to provide for a buffer for planes taking off and landing at the airport. So they had acquired land around the airport. Now this area was built up to some degree, but there was a lot of open land around the airport also. But what the County of Wayne was then encouraged to do by the federal government is to take some of this vacant land that it had acquired with federal funds as a buffer for the airport and develop it economically. So the County of Wayne arrived at a plan to develop 300 acres next to the airport as some type of a industrial development, commercial development. And it was known as Pinnacle Park, the Pinnacle Park Project. Now, on this footprint of 300 plus acres, there was some occupied property that existed, and people had some homes on it. But in order to make complete the footprint, the vacant land had to be married with some land that was occupied by some existing homes. And so the county, I think there were 40 or so existing homes. The county made offers, maybe 60. County made offers to the homeowners. You have to, in order to use the power of eminent domain, you have to make a good faith offer based upon 3 separate independent appraisals. And they made offers in something in the range of 40. All but 19, roughly, of the homeowners accepted the offer. But 19 of the homeowners did not wish to sell. So the county, which also has the power of eminent domain, commenced an action against those homeowners to acquire their property. In which case, if the county was successful, they'd have to pay just compensation. They may have also had to pay the Federal Relocation Act funding. The homeowners opposed their homes from being taken by eminent domain by the county for the purposes of completing Pinnacle Park. Now, there were no distressed economic conditions in that community 15 miles outside the city of Detroit. We have an entirely different situation than we had in the city of Detroit. Now, what happens then is the case goes up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, in the Hathcock case, concluded that its decision in the Poletown case, a different mix of justices. It was some years later, almost, I think 2 decades later, more than that, 1980, 2004, we're talking about, 20, almost a quarter century later, that the court composition was entirely different. The court concluded that Poletown was not properly interpreted prior eminent domain precedent in Michigan. They had too much relied upon the U.S. Supreme Court decision under the Fifth Amendment in interpreting the meaning of the term public use as being public purpose. And so the Michigan Supreme Court in the Hathcock case overturned Poletown and held that in this particular situation, in the county's attempt to acquire property to complete the Pinnacle project, the county did not have the power under the Michigan Constitution to use eminent domain for that purpose. Now, what happens next is the day after the Supreme Court announced its decision, the county basically held a press conference and said they didn't need the property in the first place. That they were going to complete the project without the 19 parcels, which clearly indicates to me there was no public necessity, which, by the way, in my view, is the underpinning of eminent domain from earlier precedent in Michigan, public necessity. There was no public necessity for them to acquire those 19 parcels to complete the 300-acre project.
So let me ask a few qualifying or clarifying questions. So one is that there's a distinction in these cases, Poletown and Hathcock, which we're talking about transferring private party to another private party. Is that an important distinction to understand when we're talking about eminent domain law?
It is. It very much is, because it's generally accepted that if a governmental entity, U.S. government or state, county, or city, uses eminent domain to acquire property for its own use, for a school, a municipal building, a fire station, or the like, park, that is permissible when the property is being transferred through a compulsory taking from a private owner to a public entity. It's generally accepted that is a permissible use of eminent domain, or a road, for example, bridge, road, school. Where the problem exists and where there's a difference of opinion is where the property is being taken from one private individual, transferred to another, generally a developer or a corporation, to promote economic development. And the public purpose that the government is arguing that's the basis for that taking is to alleviate unemployment or to improve the tax base of the governmental entity. So the public purpose is not for the government itself to use the property, but for the government and the people within the governmental boundaries to benefit from the private use of the property.
And what Hathcock is ruling on is when it's private party to another private party, specifically. Right.
Yes, exactly. That's what Hathcock's opinion addresses.
And then so a few other clarifying questions is, so when we're talking about this case, we're talking about public benefit, public necessity, public use. And Are these things to you the same, or are there distinctions in these terms that are important to understand to this case?
Well, if we're looking only at Michigan now, because every state has its own eminent domain precedent, and if you're looking only at Michigan, the general principles upon which the use of eminent domain in Michigan are based were articulated by Justice Thomas Cooley in the 19th century. Cooley was a member of the Michigan Supreme Court, but he also was recognized as the premier constitutional law scholar in the country. He's written a major treatise on constitutional law, both federal and state. But on the Michigan Supreme Court, he laid out the principles under Michigan law, Michigan constitutional law, as to when eminent domain can be used permissively to take property from one private individual and transfer it to another private person or entity. And he basically, in the Michigan Constitution, and there have been 5 separate constitutions as they have been, as time has gone on. The term public use was always part of the terminology used in the Constitution as being the basis for the taking. And what Cooley basically said was that the court has never in Michigan been able to clearly articulate what the term public use means. But he says, in his view, it really is more about public necessity, the need for there to be a public necessity for such a transfer to take place. And what happens in the Poletown case is the Poletown case doesn't use the Cooley analysis very well, and so it begins to muddy the water, which opens up the door for Hathcock to overrule Poletown. But anyhow, Cooley basically said, we have to be concerned about whether there's a public necessity. And we also have to be concerned that if a taking does occur, the public is primarily benefited, and the benefit to the private individual to whom the property is being transferred is only incidental. So there needs to be, as I read Cooley's commentaries and his decisions, which everyone agrees is the foundation for the use of eminent domain in Michigan. In the Hathcock case, Justice Young states that Cooley is the patron saint of this on this issue, and I agree with that. But we just disagree as to what Cooley said. What I believe Cooley said is that it needs to be a public necessity established, that the benefit has to be primarily to the public, and the benefit to the private individual to whom the property is being transferred is only incidental. Now, the first cases that Cooley decided dealt with mill dams, which were called manufactories. Mill dams essentially provided the water power to drive manufacturing operations before the steam engine. But what happens is the first case that Cooley decides regarding the attempt by a local government to take an area to create a mill dam for a private mill dam developer occurs at the time when steam engines are being widely distributed throughout the state. So both Cooley and his brethren justices on the bench conclude that there's no necessity to take a site for a mill dam when there's steam power is now being introduced and could drive the manufacturing operations. This, then, the court later concludes, demonstrates, I think wrongfully, that Cooley basically says that property may not be taken for economic development by taking it from one person and transferring it to another. I don't read it that way. I read it that Cooley and the other justices concluded that water power was no longer needed to drive manufacturing operations, and steam engines were now being widely used throughout the state, and in fact were being built in Detroit.
Is the distinction here whether you're looking at this from whether economic development is actually a public use versus looking at whether or not there is a public necessity to do this? Is that the distinction? And is that where the difference between what the Hathcock or the Hathcock court decided versus your analysis?
I think in the Hathcock case, what the court does conclude is that a public use does not mean the transferring of private property to a corporation, in this case, or a private individual, to create jobs or to strengthen the tax base. That's not a public use. That's what Hathcock stands for.
And your assessment is
even though there's a public necessity, that's not a public use, is what Hathcock stands for.
Got
in
it.
my view.
Yes, and so you think that, as you wrote in your article, that this view was an unprecedented view in Michigan's taking jurisprudence.
That's my view, because as I read all of the prior eminent domain cases, there's no case that doesn't conclude that eminent domain is improper when there is a public necessity, that the public is the primary beneficiary of the taking, and the private individual to whom the property is being transferred, or in this case the private corporation, is benefited only incidentally. Now, in the Hathcock case, they look at Poletown and say, well, General Motors was not merely benefited incidentally, because they paid it cost the city, after acquiring all the property and relocating the residents and paying them, giving them grant money to buy homes, it cost the city a couple $100 million to acquire the site, and they sold it to General Motors, 400 acres, I think it was, roughly, for $8 million or $10 million. So there, look at it. Look at this. Cost the city, they were using federal money, a couple $100 million but all that money went to the residents to give them benefits, and they bought it for $8 to $10 million, and so General Motors benefited by $190 million, and that is just failed logic. General Motors, I can tell you from my personal experience, did not necessarily care to build this plant where it built it. It was doing the city, it thought, and the Coleman Young, the mayor, a favor. It had several sites outside of the city and several outside of the state where it could have built a plant, and purchased 400 acres for less than $10 million or $8 million, whatever the figure was, I don't recall. So to me, it's totally failed logic. I can tell you that General Motors didn't want to build this plant because at the time, on the one hand, at the time, I was president of the State Science and Technology Association, and on my board was the director of manufacturing for General Motors, also from Ford, Chrysler, and I had vice presidents of research from the various universities in the state. And I had a discussion with the fellow from General Motors about the project. He said, the manufacturing staff is unanimous in not wanting to build this plant. First of all, we don't think it's going to be able to be acquired on time. We think that the construction of the plant is going to be Detroit had a reputation of not being able to act very quickly in approving building permits and inspections. We think there's going to be delay in construction. We don't think we're going to be able to meet our planned construction schedule, but they did. And so we're very much in favor of a couple other sites that are outside of the city. But the chairman of General Motors and the board, excuse me, are committed to building this plant. So, I mean, that's basically, the backdrop of what's going on here.
Yeah. So we've gone from Justice Cooley in the 1800s up to Poletown being decided in 1981, to Hathcock overturning Poletown in 2004. So now we're getting back up to our present day. And so I'd like to get into the next thing briefly, which is a constitutional amendment was passed after Hathcock. But before we get to that, I wanted to see if there's anything else in your law article that you wanted to discuss.
No, I think we've touched on most of what I had to say in the article. I mean, in the discussions that's been had so far.
Wonderful. So bring us up to speed. So after Hathcock, Poletown is effectively overturned, and then there's a constitutional amendment passed that. Well, I'll let you explain. What does the amendment do?
Well, the provision in the Michigan Constitution is Article 10, Section 2, and the wording in this is the Michigan Constitution of 1963, which continues to be the same Constitution. And the amendment, Article 10, Section 2, basically took out, changed the language in that section of the Constitution to expressly prohibit the use of eminent domain to take property from one private individual to transfer it to another private person for economic development. It simply took it out, and I mean, simply placed that language in the Constitution that fundamentally, would prevent any future Michigan Supreme Court, if the composition of the court were to change, of overturning Hathcock and returning the law to as it was interpreted in the Poletown case. In other words, it put a nail in the coffin of eminent domain for economic development purposes.
And what is your viewpoint on this? Is this all bad? Is it there's some good in this? What is your analysis?
My analysis is that it's put the city of Detroit and other distressed cities in Michigan. I can name Benton Harbor, Saginaw, Flint, Pontiac. Then there are a number of others that have had, not to the same degree as Detroit, but have suffered outmigration of industry and population and have distressed neighborhoods. It's put those cities in a straitjacket because no developer is going to come along and propose a project to the city if they can't be assured that land can be assembled for economic development. It's just not going to happen.
So I'd asked earlier about the balancing act, and you talked about the California proposition. So if we circle back to the balancing act, is this something in your opinion that goes too far in one direction? Would you have preferred something that's more of a middle ground, or how do you?
I think in taking into account the concerns on all sides and the need to help facilitate the redevelopment of distressed urban areas, I'm comfortable with Proposition 98 in California that protects homeowners who've lived in their residence for 1 year. That to me it strikes the proper balance. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I think it is workable, and I think that would be an approach that should be implemented, and to see to what degree the interests of both the public and the individual are served.
Very good. I appreciate the clarity and nuance. It's nice to be able to paint this picture and see that sometimes we're not the various sides in this maybe aren't all on opposite sides, but rather there's varying nuances that you can see in how you find solutions to these issues.
Yeah, I mean, you have to bear in mind that I'm on the law faculty at Wayne State University. I have been a consultant to the governor, to the state legislature, to the leadership in the county and the city. But I'm also was a resident and had good friends in a neighborhood that was one of the major redevelopment areas of the city, and experiences as much eminent domain as any other neighborhood in the city, other than the Poletown neighborhood and the neighborhood where the Chrysler Jefferson Avenue assembly plant was expanded. That was essentially a sister of the Poletown type project. But no other. Detroit is 140 square miles in size. 140 square miles in size. Wow. And when we're talking about Poletown, we're talking about 1 square mile, right? Or less. And the same is true of the Chrysler plant. In the Jefferson Chalmers neighborhood is about a mile and 1 square mile and a quarter. I've lived this eminent domain situation. I mean, it's not that I'm just impartial academic bystander. And I can tell you that there are many, I would say thousands of residents of Detroit that simply will watch their property decline, their services decline, and then have to leave with nothing in their pocket that might have been benefited greatly if there were projects that were proposed and they would be given all the benefits associated with having their property purchased at fair market value and receiving the grant funds and relocation funds that will allow them to live in a decent neighborhood where outside of the distressed area that they're living in.
That is certainly good food for thought, and it's a real value having you on, because you're both an expert from a legal standpoint, but as you pointed out, you also lived in this area and have for your life and have experienced this. So you bring a unique and a qualified perspective to this. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to our discussion of our film Taking Poletown? Something we missed that you'd like to talk about, or the case Poletown, or yeah?
I thought the film, was balanced and well presented the case, and there have been, several attempts to do documentaries. I think your documentary was done well. What's missing in what's been done so far are interviews with those who are satisfied with the outcome of the project. Now, I understand they're not easy to locate. But, thousands of people, were involved in that Poletown project. And in the case of the documentary, nobody's interviewed that might say, look, my house was taken, but this is the result. I moved to Sterling Heights in a house that was very satisfactory to me and in a neighborhood that was much newer and where schools were much better and my children have benefited, or whatever. I don't know what you're going to find out. But I can tell you from my Jefferson Chalmers experience, there were many of my friends who were relocated and would give testimony that they felt that they benefited considerably from the outcome.
Well, I think that's a fair point, and I'm glad that the film comes off as balanced as it does. But I think that the more perspectives that we can get into a film, and something like what you're speaking about, would only make it stronger and paint a more complete picture of the situation. I'm glad that you're able to come on and share that though with us and share that with our audience, because I think that is an important perspective to be heard. Which is why we like doing these podcasts, is to bring even more context and perspectives on, because as much as we try to get as many views and paint as much of a picture as we can, we certainly don't get everything in there. So I'll ask my final question, which is, at FedSoc Films, we believe that the law matters, and we want to help our audience better understand these issues and why they matter. So why do you think that eminent domain and the other legal issues we discussed are important? And in other words, why should people care?
Well, people should care because in the case of the eminent domain focus that we have been discussing, that is taking property for economic development purposes. If people care about redeveloping distressed urban areas, they need to care about eminent domain, because you simply cannot redevelop distressed large areas. I'm not talking about just doing a 3-acre site. That can be assembled. But if we're talking about in the case of Detroit, we probably have 40 square miles in the aggregate of vacant land. If we're talking about beginning to assemble redeveloped neighborhoods, it's almost impossible in the absence of eminent domain. And so if you care about redeveloping neighborhoods, not just small sites, but neighborhoods in distressed urban areas, then it becomes it's a subject that should be of concern, of interest to you.
I think that's a good place to leave it. If you don't mind telling our audience where they can find more about you or your work, or both.
Well, I am a professor of law at Wayne State University. I have a website there. If you simply go to a search engine and type in Professor John E. Mogk, M-O-G-K, at Wayne State University Law School, you'll come to my page, my website page, and it'll tell you all about me.
Wonderful. Well, Professor Mogk, thank you for spending time with us. I appreciate you being on our show.
My pleasure, and good job.
Our guest today was Professor John Mogk, the Distinguished Service Professor of Law and the Chair of the Levin Center at Wayne Law Faculty Committee at Wayne State University in Michigan. Professor Mogk has received special commendations from the Michigan Legislature and Detroit Common Council, and was selected as Outstanding Professor by the law school student body many times, as well as numerous other awards and honors. And he's been nice enough to grant us more of his time today to talk about our film Taking Poletown and just other issues surrounding eminent domain in Michigan. This episode on eminent domain, public use, and Poletown was in connection to our film Taking Poletown. You can check out the film on YouTube, Facebook, or fedsoc.org. That's FEDSOC.org. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe for more episodes of the FedSoc Films Podcast. As always, the Federal Society doesn't take any positions on the issues discussed. That's a wrap.
This has been a FedSoc audio production.